Hi, my name is Ginny, also known as Two-Thirds Lotus, and this clip is part of my series analyzing the Essential Bukowski, edited by Abel DeBrito. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as it was streamed on Twitch, with all the imperfections and tangents of a live stream. If you want to learn more or catch me live, make sure to check out the description, otherwise enjoy the incredible work of Charles Bukowski. Here's Crucifix and a Death Hand, though, by Charles Bukowski. Yes, they begin out in a willow, I think. The starch mountains begin out in the willow, and keep right on going without regard for pumas or nectarines. Somehow, these mountains are like an old woman with a bad memory and a shopping basket. We're in a basin. That is the idea. Down in the sand and the alleys, this land punched in, cuffed out, divided, held like a crucifix in a death hand. This land bought, resold, bought again and sold again, the wars long over. The Spaniards all the way back in Spain, down in the thimble again, and now real estaters, subdividers, landlords, freeway engineers arguing. This is their land, and I walk on it. Live on it a little while near Hollywood. Here I see young men in rooms listening to glazed recordings, and I think too of old men, sick of music, sick of everything, and death like suicide I think is sometimes voluntary, and to get your hold on the land here, it is best to return to the Grand Central Market. You see the old Mexican women, the poor. I am sure you have seen these same women many years before, arguing with the same young Japanese clerks, witty, knowledgeable, and golden, among their soaring store of oranges, apples, avocados, tomatoes, cucumbers. And you know how these look. They do look good, as if you could eat them all. Light a cigar and smoke away the bad world, then it's best to go back to the bars, the same bars, wooden, stale, merciless, green, with the young policeman walking through, scared and looking for trouble. And the beer is still bad. It has an edge that already mixes with vomit and decay, and you've got to be strong in the shadows to ignore it, to ignore the poor and ignore yourself and the shopping bag between your legs. Down there, feeling good with its avocados and oranges and fresh fish and wine bottles, who needs a Fort Lauderdale winter? 25 years ago, there used to be a whore there, with a film over one eye, who was too fat and made little silver bells out of cigarette tinfoil. The sun seemed warmer then, although this was probably not true. And you take your shopping bag outside and walk along the streets, and the green beer hangs there, just above your stomach like a short and shameful shawl, and you look around and no longer see any old men. Crucifix in a Death Hand by Charles Bukowski. Pilsner Grip, you say, okay, Bukowski, I get you're tired of the UK cooking and want some salsa. US cooking. He was from LA, and before that he was from Germany, but he moved to America when he was very young. I don't think he ever spent time in the UK. I mean, he might have spent some time in the UK, but this was not, I don't think, a notable place for him. But I could be wrong. This is a very interesting poem. I didn't expect I didn't expect crucifix in a death hand. A poem called this to be about shopping bags and old women in markets, and I mean old men, it makes sense. Bukowski talks a lot about old men and old women, I suppose, but and there is a feeling of death in this poem for sure. But it's not in the way I expected. Just from Bukowski. Interesting poem. I'm gonna read it again. Just to enjoy it. And I hope you all sit and enjoy it as well, because this poem is beautiful, I think. Yes. Sorry. Crucifix in a death hand. Yes, they begin out in a willow. I think the starch mountains begin out in the willow, and keep right on going without regard for pumas or nectarines. Somehow these mountains are like an old woman with a bad memory and a shopping basket. We are in a basin. That is the idea. Down in the sand and the alleys, this land punched in, cuffed out, divided, held like a crucifix in a death hand. This land bought, resold, bought again and sold again, the war's long over. The Spaniards all the way back to Spain, down in the thimble again, and now real estaters, subdividers, landlords, freeway engineers arguing, this is their land and I walk on it. I live on it a little while, near Hollywood, where I see young men in rooms listening to glazed recordings. And I think, too, of old men sick of music, sick of everything, and death like suicide. I think is sometimes voluntary, and to get your hold on the land here, it is best to return to the Grand Central Market. See the old Mexican women, the poor. I'm sure you have seen these same women many years before, arguing with the same young Japanese clerks, witty, knowledgeable, and golden. Among their soaring store of oranges, apples, avocados, tomatoes, cucumbers. And you know how these look. They do look good, as if you could eat them all. Light a cigar and smoke away the bad world. Then it's best to go back to the bars, the same bars, wooden, stale, merciless, green. With the young policeman walking through, scared and looking for trouble, and the beer is still bad. It has an edge that already mixes with the vomit and decay, and you've got to be strong in the shadows to ignore it. To ignore the poor, and to ignore yourself and the shopping bag between your legs. Down there, feeling good with its avocados and oranges and fresh fish and wine bottles. Who needs a Fort Lauderdale winter? 25 years ago, there used to be a whore there, with a film over one eye, who was too fat and made little silver bells out of cigarette tinfoil. The sun seemed warmer then, although this was probably not true. And you take your shopping bag outside and walk along the street, and the green beer hangs there, just above your stomach, like a short and shameful shawl. And you look around and no longer see any old men. Crucifix and the Death Hand by Charles Bukowski. Pilsner Grip. I got you, yeah. You do love the land description. Yes. It's a beautiful description. I like how we go from punched in, cuffed out, divided, and then bought, resold, bought again, and sold again. The way it moves in this poem. Ghostly Engraves. I don't know if my poem counts as poetry after that. Your poem counts as poetry. It does. But yes, Bukowski is very, very, very good. And comparison is also sometimes the death of art, and I think your poem is probably a beautiful thing, just as much as this one, in different, unique, and singular ways, right? At least I hope that's the case. I can assume. So we have a few things going on through this poem. We have age in the old men, the old women, and then like the young men as well. We also have like the idea of the land and changing of hands, and almost like a discussion of colonization, right, in the first half of the poem. And then there's like the through line of the shopping bag and basket, which is very interesting as a symbol, right? This thing that collects things, carries the things we need. And then, of course, crucifix and a death hand. There's necessarily something about death here. There's also the parts about alcohol, the bar, the green beer. There's a lot going on. I think there's a lot of change in this poem. Maybe I want to look at some of the things. So, in terms of like big through line themes, or not themes, but through lines. We have a shopping basket here. Later, I don't think we have the other shopping bag until the next page. Yeah, but we mentioned it a few times. The shopping bag between your legs, right? And then you take your shopping bag at the end. This is an interesting symbol, and not one that immediately is evident to me in meaning, but it is certainly important, right? We have discussions of age. The old woman with bad memory. Later, young men in rooms. Old men sick of music. Old Mexican women. Young Japanese clerks. And then, young policemen walking through. And no old men at the end. We also talk about like 25 years ago in terms of time, aging, change, right? You submitted it, Ghostly Engraves. Awesome. It makes me think about the longer passage of history. Land changes hands, people die. The latter reminds me a lot of just a time and a place, and how it carries on without care for you. I like these observations. So we have land changing hands, and we can, yes, the next thing that's very much a through line is the land. I mean, it starts out willow, mountains, again the mountains, a basin, that is LA, in the sand in the alleys, so this is like the place. And then we have the land bought and resold. And then real estate, subdividers, a new imposition onto the land. Even Hollywood itself is probably a symbol of the land changing. And then like the old market, right? Which lets you get your hold on the land. Certain people. And then, among the soaring store of oranges, even talking about food, right? Southern California, Central Valley, agriculture. This is very much, I think, to do with the land. Describing bars and beer as green, feel maybe slightly related. And most of this goes into other things, not so much the land. Reminds me of the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I do love that film project. I think you've mentioned it before in chat, and I'm not familiar with it. And you explained it to me, and then I've since forgotten what it is. Some kind of retelling of another story in America, methinks I remember. What else are through lines in this poem? There's food. Certainly there's food. Age, death. Maybe I should underline death. Things related to death. So, held like a crucifix in a death hand. Wars. Death like suicide. Coen Brothers basically made stories they didn't film and put them into one film. Interesting. Sort of talking about smoking away the bad worlds. Maybe points toward that death. No longer any old men. There's also a few mentions of poverty in this poem, which I think is somewhat related. I want to start with the line, the titular line, held like a crucifix in a death hand, right? To me, it feels like there's a magnification as the poem carries. We start with the very broad outlook of the land, and we get closer, more personal with the people, and maybe they are of that land, and then we are there at the very end, and it feels increasingly personal. I like this. This is an interesting, broad observation of maybe a rhetorical move that Bukowski has made. Magnification, zooming in throughout the poem. We start with the willows and the mountains and the basins, and then we slowly dive deeper and the land and the Spaniards, and then we dive into LA and Hollywood and Grand Central Market, and then from Grand Central Market into one bar, and then from that bar to, out onto the street looking around. A single person's perspective. This is interesting. That's a very, very good observation of the motion, I think, happening in this poem, right? But what does it mean? So I want to start, as I said, held like a crucifix in a death hand, and go from here. Down in the sand in the alleys, this land punched in, cuffed out, divided. Held like a crucifix in a death hand. And Bukowski is, by this point, speaking specifically about LA. We are in the basin, down in the sand in the alleys. This is the city. Right? And and he describes the city. Punched in, cuffed out, and divided. This is violent, certainly. And I think he goes to talk about a sort of history of violence. Bukowski writes or toys with the idea of violence a lot in his poems. And this specifically speaks to a lot of it on a broad level, with the Spaniards, and then even, I think, like, these people arguing, right? Punched in, cuffed out, and divided. Divided is cool because it means a few things. It could mean split up, perhaps between those like the Spaniards and then the real estaters. Divided as in, perhaps societally divided. Like we talk about today with like societally. Or maybe like economically. He shows this in the poem as well. The witty, knowledgeable young Japanese clerks and Hollywood young men against the poor old Mexican women, right? You also have the line punched in, or specifically the phrase punched in. I like this a lot. So we can think about physically something being punched in. Let's say a wall, a door, whatever. You don't punch in a door. A face, right? It is broken and divided. Interestingly, punched in is a double meaning with, like, on the clock, work, which then ties back into some of these larger monetary themes, where it is broken and it is also this city of, like, wealth. It is divided economically. It is divided between people physically. You also have cuffed out. We speak to a police officer later, and I think in many ways, that's probably what this is referencing, right? You're kept out sort of lawfully. Held like a crucifix in a death hand. So we think about a death hand, right? This is someone who is dead and holding a crucifix, clutching to this thing as they are dying for some kind of hope. This is what that image is to me, right? The crucifix is a symbol of hope. The crucifix is a symbol of like religious salvation for the Christian. And as you are dying, as you are clutching it, and then you die, the hand stays clutched. We talk about a death grip. This is what that phrase is referring to, right? And in that way, there is a sort of hope implied in this symbol to holding on to this land. There's a power as well, right? It almost says the land that is Los Angeles is like God to a dying man. And it is. It's a city of wealth. It's a city of division. It is a city of change. All of these things. There is unrest within the land we have carved out for ourselves. Exactly. Yes. And that unrest, I think, only makes us want to clutch tighter. And there's a history of this. This land bought, resold, bought again, sold again. The war is long over. It is still happening. But I think the interesting thing, he says, like, the war is long over, and yet the actions of the war, the real estaters, the subdividers, the landlords, are still buying, reselling, buying again, and selling again. So in some sense, this is very similar to the war itself. The war is still going on in a way, even if we don't say it is, even if we say the war is over. This is their land and I walk on it. sort of an occupation. Occupation, ownership. I am separate from them and I sort of don't belong. LA is very much a revolving door of people and ideas. This is why I want to go live in LA sometimes. I could be an LA girly. I think I would hate it. I think the revolving door would chew me up. So, this is the historical state of the land as people have interacted with it. I think we should pull back to the start, because there's a chronological feeling to this. The mountains, like an old woman with a bad memory, as old as time and decaying and breaking down. Moving into the people, the buying, the selling, the Spaniards, and then now into the modern age of real estaters and subdividers and Hollywood, right? I think this speaks to the sort of bones of the land underneath. Yes, they begin out in a willow. I think the starch mountains begin out in the willow and keep on going without regard for pumas or nectarines. Somehow these mountains are like an old woman with a bad memory and a shopping basket. Right. I think the mountains as a woman with a bad memory. They forget and are forgotten. We no longer care about this part of the land. We care about the divvying up, the buying, the selling, the splitting up, the division, the punching in, the buying and reselling. I do not live there, but I have friends who do. From what they've said, LA is like a dryer that throws you about until it breaks you where you learn how to tumble. There's something appealing about that to me. I also simultaneously think I want to live in like a rural locale. Rural Colorado, Michigan. Maybe not Michigan. So, the mountains, the land is forgotten, and the land forgets. The land is the old people. And, he says down here, and to get your hold on the land, it is best to return to the grand central market, see the old Mexican women. The poor. I'm sure you have seen these same women many years before, arguing. And many years before, I wonder if this is Bukowski giving us a little clue, many years before, as the old women that are the mountains. This feels like it has to be intentional and pointing the reader to make this connection. And he says you can still see them for now. There is still some of that old life, old vitality in this city. You just have to go find it. And it's in probably the people Bukowski would call something like real people. People who have to live lives, people who have to fight, people who are poor, people who don't listen to glazed recordings in rooms in Hollywood, right? I like this. Near Hollywood, I see young men in rooms listening to glazed recordings. Glazed. Perfect. They have a sheen. Sort of artificial. clean, right? As opposed to the unclean mountains, land, and the old people. He thinks also of the old men sick of music, sick of everything, and probably sick because of this, because Bukowski might see, this might be a little like, this might be speaking to the boomer, like, oh, all this new music is like awful, and I only listen to music from the 1930s because that's real music or whatever, right? I think this sort of speaks to that sentiment. The old men are sick of music because they're sick of the new. They're sick of everything because LA, as this revolving door, is the new, right? We see this in old people. They're conservative. They don't want change. Which maybe is understandable when you look at the beauty of the mountains at the start. But there's some beauty in the change here too. If you look at it at a right angle and cock your head and squint your eyes. So, and death, like suicide, I think is sometimes voluntary. Oh, that line is so cool. I just figured out what that was saying. Oh my god. Okay. Death, like suicide, is sometimes voluntary. I just didn't really read it grammatically. Death, if we take out like suicide, is sometimes voluntary. Sometimes we choose to die. In a way that is not suicide, but similar to it, right? And this is in relation to the old man sick of music. They are probably dead long before they have stopped breathing. They are dead because they are dead to the city, right? The city is about the motion. The city is about the change. The city is about this flow. And they are dead in the same way that the mountains are dead. Dead like the mountains. And they don't say that the mountains are dead, but we move on from thinking about the mountains. We move on from this into the dividing, the buying, the selling. And they die in that change. The old women die, the old men die in their own ways. And Bukowski starts to offer us a solution for this in living a real life. Not the glazed and perfect recordings, not Hollywood, not landlords and pinching pennies and trying to make the most money. Not freeways, but walking on streets and markets with people selling fruit. This is Bukowski's solution for us. People talk about Bukowski as a cynic, and as a really grumpy and depressed old man. Not depressed, but angry alcoholic. And it's his poems like this that remind me that he sees good in a lot of things. And I don't think people take the time to realize the positive things in his poems, because he talks about, after all of this, he's going to talk about all the beauty of the city that is still here. Arguing with the same young Japanese clerks. Witty, knowledgeable, and golden. And this is the old woman, the mountain, arguing with the Spaniards and arguing with the real estaters, right? This is the real estate. This is the Spaniards. Because we have the old, honest market, farmer's market, grand central market kind of thing. And we have the young clerks, the businessmen, moving in, as they do to everything, to something that is old and genuine and venerable. Because they are smart, they are witty, they are knowledgeable, they're after money. And Bukowski is showing us a part of LA that is also, he seems to say, beginning to die. Among their soaring store of oranges, apples, avocados, tomatoes, cucumbers. This is a wealth, and this is a wealth of natural things. A wealth and ownership, wealth of nature. And this is why they are the same as the landlords, owning the land. The Spaniards owning the land. The clerks owning the fruit of the land and selling it with their wit. And you know how these look? They do look good, as if you could eat them all. I think it's interesting that these is italicized. We specifically know how these look. The italicization puts emphasis on this word, and that means these as opposed to the those. Right? How you know, and you know how these look, because you don't know how those look. And I wonder if these is referring to this form of wealth that you can see sort of overtaking the land, where it is more difficult to engage with, it is more difficult to engage, like the broader systems of the ownership, the economic exploitation of the land. But you can see businessmen selling you fruit that farmers grew, right? Light a cigar and smoke away the bad world. Then it's best to go back to the bars, the same bars. You see, he realizes, he hopes that he can go back to the market and see the beauty of the market. And yet, now it's been, in some way, economically exploited. The avocados and tomatoes and so on also reminds me of temporary wealth. What they produce will spoil. The produce will spoil and their worth will be gone. They are temporary. Yeah, and maybe that speaks even to the sort of required speed to keep up with what is going on. This is a dangerous thing. Being after the money. The money can go away. You can chase after buying apartments and being a landlord and building highways or whatever, and all of this, or selling fruit and trying to get that leg up. But it can all come crashing down. It can all spoil. I think that's an excellent observation because it adds to our understanding of his maybe disdain for the landlords, not just because they're taking something, but because they're replacing something venerable with something that will spoil. I like that, Ghostly Engraves. You're very insightful. And you know how these look. So light a cigar and smoke away the bad world. This bad world, the world of the businessman. And then it's best to go back to the bars, the same bars of his younger years, 25 years ago, right? There used to be a whore there. And this is him holding on, grasping onto memory. Maybe this is a sort of different crucifix in a different death hand. Everyone's grasping for something. Everyone has their crucifix in their death hand that they are trying to find comfort and find something genuine. And he looks here. Others see the land as the crucifix. He sees the beauty of the people and what is old as the crucifix. He probably also sees beauty in the change, which is probably the right thing to do. That's probably a pretty dialectical way to see it. Same bars. Wooden, stale, merciless, green. Wooden, natural. Stale, old. Merciless, unchanging. Green, alive, maybe? He sees life here. But I think he sees life that is also dying, because they are stale. With young policemen, the new people walking through and looking for trouble, trying to change this old thing that we had, trying to make change. And the beer is still bad. This thing has stayed the same. It has an edge that already mixes with vomit and decay, and you've got to be strong in the shadows to ignore it. To ignore the poor and ignore yourself and the shopping bag between your legs. What if we, or the writer, are the old man at the end? What if we are moving through this world trying to hold on what we think the golden days are, now tainted by time? Then in the end, we are no longer there. Everything keeps moving. I think that's reasonable. I think we are probably, in a way, everybody in this poem. At times, we are the young people pushing for change. I'm often this person right now, trying to create something from something that already is full of beauty, trying to improve. And then also the old people. Sometimes we are looking at the world and seeing it with disdain, and sometimes the world that is moving eats us up, right? And doesn't let us hold on to the things because time is just pulling away. The end, we are no longer there. Everything keeps moving. Yeah, I think this speaks greatly to just time and impending motion, which maybe makes the line earlier in the poem about death being voluntary all the more powerful. What we were saying about some people being dead before they stop breathing. This is probably the worst. Anyone who does this is probably Bukowski's least favorite person in the poem, actually. Death, like suicide, I think is sometimes voluntary. And Bukowski probably believes that someone who dies before they nod off into an endless slumber is somewhat... I mean, he talks like this in interviews, and he talks about fighting and fighting to the end and always creating art and dying with something left behind you, art. And I think Bukowski would be remiss to, furious even if he died, if he gave up and died before he died. So that might be the big advice of the poem, is we are all subject to this thing. We are all subject to this motion, and at very least, we should die on the terms of time. That seems potentially reasonable. We're not quite through it yet, though. And the beer is still bad. It's like some things haven't changed. Interesting it is like the bad part that hasn't changed, but there's also like a charm to bad beer. It is an edge that already mixes with vomit and decay. 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 This poem feels like very self-referential. If we talk about the wealth as something that is not sort of eternal, there is not that is temporary, and in that regard, life is something that is temporary, and everything is decaying. And there is like bad beer, and the bad things remind us of the gross, dying parts of life, so you have to be strong in the shadows to ignore it. In the shadows, when you are in the dark, when you are in pain, this is when one must ignore that. Ignore the poor. Ignore the people who are the victims of this. Ignore yourself and the shopping bag between your legs. Down there, feeling good with its avocados and oranges and fresh fish and wine bottles, who needs a Fort Lauderdale winter? Winter in LA, right? Ignore yourself. There is all of this pain. There is all of this suffering inflicted upon you, by you. And Bukowski says here, probably to remember the little things. I think, so he says, who needs a Fort Lauderdale winter? He likes the winter in LA. He finds comfort in it. He doesn't need to escape to somewhere warm because he still has in the winter fresh fruit, avocados, oranges, fish, wine. Wine. He loves wine. Bukowski loves wine. These are all good things, right? I keep thinking about the shopping bag. What is a shopping bag? It is thin and fragile and often tossed away. It's replaceable. Could it be life? Ooh, I think it is life that is fleeting and thin, but it holds all of the beautiful things that make life worth living. Bag is thin, replaceable, like life. But it holds flavor, basically. It's also important to note, I think it's between our legs because we hold it close. We want these things. At the start, we have a shopping basket, right? The basket is reusable. The basket is sustainable. We have gone from living sustainable, fulfilling lives to lives that are unsustainable, false, through a veneer, through a glaze of what it should be. And yes, there's still beautiful things. There's still avocados inside. There's still fresh fish and wine. There is still beauty here. So Bukowski offers this sort of juxtaposition of there is still beauty, there is still love to be had in life. And yet, we also live in a time of decay and waste and buying and selling and buying again and selling again. I like this. I like these ideas. I'm going to run a little ad and steep my tea again, and then I will come back and we will finish out this poem after that. Encourage you all to get something to drink, go to the bathroom, don't watch the ad. Hello, and welcome back. Hi, I'm still Ginny, still known as 2/3 Lotus, and we are still reading Bukowski, and I have more tea. This makes me happy. Because, the poets of Twitch can be abbreviated to teapot, so it's fitting for me to have tea. Pilsner. Totally off topic, I wanted to ask what you think about The Lighthouse. If you saw it, I'm not familiar with The Lighthouse. Drink some water. Okay. Let's read the whole poem again, because this is good to do after a break. And then we'll go into the last section. Crucifix in a death hand. Yes, they begin out in a willow. I think the starch mountains begin out in the willow. And keep right on going without regard for pumas or nectarines. Somehow these mountains are like an old woman with a bad memory and a shopping basket. We are in a basin, that is the idea. Down in the sand and the alleys, this land punched in, cuffed out, divided, held like a crucifix in a death hand. This land bought, resold, bought again and sold again, the wars long over, the Spaniards all the way back to Spain, down in the thimble again. But now, real estate, real estaters, subdividers, landlords, freeway engineers, arguing. This is their land. And I walk on it, live on it a little while. Near Hollywood, here I see young men in rooms, listening to glazed recordings. And I think, too, of old men, sick of music, sick of everything, and death, like suicide, I think, is sometimes voluntary. And to get your hold on the land here, it is best to return to the grand central market, see the old Mexican women, the poor. I am sure you have seen these same women many years before, arguing with the same young Japanese clerks, witty, knowledgeable, golden. Among their soaring store of oranges, apples, avocados, tomatoes, cucumbers. And you know how these look. They do look good, as if you could eat them all. Light a cigar. Smoke away the bad world. Then it's best to go back to the bars. The same bars, wooden, stale, merciless, green. With the young policeman walking through scared and looking for trouble, and the beer is still bad. It has an edge that already mixes with vomit and decay, and you've got to be strong in the shadows to ignore it, to ignore the poor, and to ignore yourself and the shopping bag between your legs. Down there, feeling good with its avocados and oranges and fresh fish and wine bottles, who needs a Fort Lauderdale winter? 25 years ago, there used to be a whore there, with a film over one eye, who was too fat and made little silver bells out of cigarette tinfoil. The sun seemed warmer then, although this was probably not true. And you take your shopping bag outside and walk along the street, and the green beer hangs there, just above your stomach, like a short and shameful shawl, and you look around and no longer see any old men. Crucifix in a death hand. by Charles Bukowski. Interesting things I noticed. Talks at the start about the mountains keep going without regards for pumas or nectarines. And I think this points ahead to the puma is a hunter, the nectarine is a sweet fruit. The idea is the capitalist drives sort of that we see later in like the clerks in the market. That's like another tie in there. I wish I could offer another rhymes, but I got nothing. Well, no worries. Let me take my tea out. It's been steeping for a couple minutes too long, methinks. Okay. And let's go to this second page. 25 years ago, there used to be a whore there with a film over one eye. He was too fat. I think if I'm remembering like correctly an interview with Charles Bukowski, this might be referring to the first person he had sex with. He talks about a fat whore who I think they broke the bed. It's in an interview somewhere on on YouTube, and it's very interesting in the way that anytime Bukowski speaks, it's interesting. But this is just the past. I think he's just reminiscing about a very, bygone person and day and his youth. Okay, Charlie, calm down. Yeah, he does not calm down. Well, he's like surprisingly calm all the time for his antics. If you watch an interview of him, like, he talks in this consistent, drawn out tone and has interesting inflection and sits in every vowel. This is how Charles Bukowski talks. And if he gets excited, he's about here. And he'll talk about how much he loves alcohol. This is like, honestly, probably, I think, a very good Charles Bukowski impression. If you go listen to him. Like, he doesn't really yell. He doesn't really, like, go fast. He takes his time. It's really interesting. So the sun seemed warmer then, although it was probably not true. So this is, I think, probably just a sort of platitude of, like, nostalgia. He's just reminiscing for a moment, because this is the bar, right? The same bar, as he said. And he has memories here. And this is a way he can forget. I'm on the side of F.U. heroes. What do you mean by that? Like, your heroes? Like, the people who are, like, cool and you look up to, you should also be like, F.U.? Your. Okay, yeah. I think that's fair. Or do we mean like the actual action? Because this is something I would also do. Not Bukowski, probably. I don't think I would do that. But there are like other of my heroes who I would definitely get in a bed with. And you take your shopping bag, your little temporary thing of life. Don't have heroes have inspirations? Yeah, I think this is like generally the case. I was using your word, heroes, but inspirations is probably a better word. Like, Bukowski is not a hero of mine by any means. He's certainly a massive inspiration and influence on me. So you take your shopping bag outside and walk along the street. And this sort of contrasts the highways, right? And it's not a road, right? It's a street. It's a place you can walk. It's a place that can be slow. And the green beer hangs there just above your stomach. Like a short and shameful shawl. And you look around and no longer see any old men. So the beer is still bad and has an edge that already mixes with vomit and decay. Why you write on books? Aw. It's so fun. I end up with a piece of art by the end of this. Or I will. This is the first book I've written on to the degree that I am. And the green beer hangs above your stomach like a short and shameful shawl. Ill-fitting. I think it's at the top of his stomach, he can still taste it. And he can feel it. But it could be that it's spilled. This is also reasonable. I'm not certain. So this is very Bukowski to get drunk and spill beer. Also just sort of taste in mouth. Oh yeah, why should I not write on books? And this also makes sense. He talks about, so the beer has an edge that already mixes with vomit. So it's just sitting somewhere in between and weighing and reminding of the decay, maybe. Maybe this is just to say that he is decaying. Ill-fitting. A short and shameful shawl. And you look around and no longer see any old man. He's talking about heartburn. Oh, very well could be. I am one of those that never draws or writes on books. I think that's fair. That's reasonable. I think to never do something really why, I mean, maybe I'm the one taking an action, so I should, the burden of proof is on me to state my case on writing on books. And I think writing on books is, how do I phrase this? I mean, I think writing on books is a beautiful, beautiful thing, right? It lets you engage with the text. Of course you can write on another page, but you are literally underlining, scrawling, putting your ideas alongside the work, right? And when I see something like analysis as a collaborative effort between me and the art on the page, I think a great representation, a great symbol of that working together, of that collaboration, is, a book full of pages that are deeply scribbled upon. That's probably my thoughts. I understand if the book is an artifact. Yeah, there's certain books that I don't write on. I don't write on library books. I think any surface that can be owned by you can be remade. Refaced, if you might. As a writer, I would greatly be honored if someone write alongside my words. That, yes. A friend once lent me his copy of Wittgenstein's Tractatus. It was almost illegible between underlining and notes. I think that's why. See, and I think if it did not have notes, that friend, the book would have been illegible to that friend without the notes. Part of it is an act of comprehension. Right? Writing is something that helps us, and it can be right there next to the words. It doesn't need to be on another page. It can be direct, immediate, alongside. Right? Ghostly and graves. writing alongside your words. I find it beautiful. So Bukowski no longer sees any old men. And it also may be that the beer gives him a feeling of youth and an energy. Like, this could sort of be like an ode to his love for alcohol. I seriously believe, like, that could be an interpretation here. Is that, I mean, maybe he loves it and he doesn't, right? Because it changes the world. It changes his world. He can become young again through the freedom of alcohol and can be like those who are not old. Because I think we talk about the young not seeing the old in this poem, the young not acknowledging the old, the landlords and the Spaniards not acknowledging the land and the people. And so, as he becomes young in a sort of way, and he also spends time reminiscing, right? He's reminiscing over his past, and this probably brings him back to the time of youth as well, right? So he is not seeing that. He's not seeing the old anymore. His perspective has changed. The old is gone. Time has stolen what once was, as it does all things. We are no longer who we were when we started this poem. The mountains are no longer the same. Yeah, so this could be Bukowski changing. It could also just be that, you know, he's talking more broadly, right, about not this day, but this more recent period in his life, where he's noticing things like the Japanese clerks in the store that was once just the old Mexican women, or the market that was just once the old Mexican women, this kind of thing. The young men in rooms and their glazed recordings. These are symptoms of a new age of sort of newness and glitz and falsity and thin plastic bags that treats people like thin plastic bags for holding forever. And so as he gets to this the end of this poem, he leaves us with a sort of dark conclusion that, like, this sort of age is upon him, and that the old are done. The old have been cast away. And I wonder if this is something that still remains. It probably is. I don't think there is much of a respect for the old in America. And I also think that it died because there is now also, like, within, like, social media, a resurgence of an appreciation for, like, vintage fashion, which, you know, always goes through and happens. It's a cycle, right? But, like, this deep desire for vintage fashion and cottage core and these things, and something old and genuine. And Bukowski almost, I mean, he speaks to the cycle, maybe, of the phasing out of the old. It's becoming a look into the past, becoming the old and genuine for the new and disingenuous. It's very well spoken. It's very much like a grandfather's lament. Yes. At the time of writing, he's probably only a father, but yes. Any questions about the poem? Does anyone dislike it? Do we love it? Do we hate it? Do we think we want to change it? Do we think we can do better? Is this poem perfect in all ways and facets? Probably not, but it's hard to find imperfections in something like Bukowski. Maybe I wish the start was a little more clear. I'm not really sure, like, yes, they begin out in a willow. I think the Starch Mountains begin out in the willow. Like, he thinks, maybe it's that he doesn't know and there's distance, but it's sort of, like odd that sentence. A very neat viewpoint. It captures a very specific idea in a thoughtful manner. Absolutely. And this is probably what poetry is supposed to do. So that is a good thing for sure. And I agree with you. That changing of viewpoint, that zooming in, it shows us the city in a very interesting way. Bukowski does this often. He shows us the city as a system, and then he also shows us the city as its people. And I think Bukowski has a real skill, or had a real skill, in taking something large and finding the small in it, and taking something small and finding the ways that it reflects the large. This might be exactly what one does in poetry. Taking something small, a metaphor, expanding it onto life, taking life, something big, something complicated, and distilling it down into a few words that can say something powerful. Maybe. I do like it. It's cool, especially from the point of view of older world. Yeah. The way it looks from the old to the young. And it's interesting because I don't think the young ever looks back at the old in this poem. The young looks forward, and the old looks forward, but forward is the young who are pushing them backward. It's an interesting sentence. I liked that sentence. I say lots of good sentences on stream. So, let's read it one more time. I'm going to read it off of the Bukowski handwriting version on the next page, because I want to. Crucifix and a Death Hand by Charles Bukowski. Yes, they begin out in the willow, I think. The starch mountains begin out in the willow, and keep right on going without regard for pumas or nectarines. Somehow these mountains are like an old woman with a bad memory and a shopping basket. We are in the basin. That is the idea. Down in the sand and the alleys, this land punched in, cuffed out, divided, held like a crucifix in a death hand. This land bought, resold, bought again and sold again. The wars are long over. The Spaniards all the way back in Spain, down in the thimble again, and now the real estaters, subdividers, landlords, freeway engineers arguing. This is their land, and I walk on it, live on it a little while. Near Hollywood, here where I see young men in rooms, listening to glazed recordings. And I think too of old men sick of music, sick of everything, and death like suicide. I think it's sometimes voluntary, and to get your hold on the land here, it is best to return to the grand central market, see the old Mexican women, the poor. I am sure you have seen these same women many years before. With the same young Japanese clerks, witty, knowledgeable, and golden, among their soaring store of oranges, apples, avocados, tomatoes, cucumbers, and you know how these look. They do look good, as if you could eat them all. Light a cigar and smoke away the bad world. Then it's best to go back to the bars, the same bars, wooden, stale, merciless, green. With the young policeman walking through, scared and looking for trouble. And the beer is still bad. It has an edge that already mixes with vomit and decay. And you've got to be strong in the shadows to ignore it. To ignore the poor. And to ignore yourself and the shopping bag between your legs. Down there, feeling good with its avocados and oranges and fresh fish and wine bottle. Who needs a Fort Lauderdale winter? 25 years ago, there used to be a whore there with a film over one eye who was too fat and made little silver bells out of cigarette tinfoil. The sun seemed warmer then, although this was probably not true, and you take your shopping bag outside and walk along the street, and the green beer hangs there just above your stomach, like a short and shameful shawl, and you look around and no longer see any old men. Charles Bukowski, Crucifix, in a death hand. Thank you all for watching along and participating in that analysis. I think that was beautiful. I like this poem a lot. Thanks for listening to me and my thoughts on Bukowski. Make sure to check out the rest of the series if you enjoyed, and follow or stop by Twitch if you want to see more. See you there.